voters Atika was just talking about, Angela Merkel has vowed to get AfD voters back. Now, she's fighting against a wave of economic and political discontent that, as you know, has swept through Europe and the United States. Now, let's compare some of those disaffected voters. In Germany, an influx of refugees and economic inequality helped fuel that far-right surge. The AfD did particularly well among men. Does this sound familiar? Men without college degrees. And in East Germany, where analysts say many citizens do not feel integrated into the modern German economy. Now, in the United States, President Trump bragged about his support among those without college degrees. His champion against globalization won him support in manufacturing states like Michigan and Pennsylvania. Meantime, if we go to the UK, Brexit supporters campaigned on issues of national sovereignty rather than economics. But a majority of pro-leave voters say significant damage to the British economy. Yeah, they're willing to pay that price in order to leave the EU. Joining me now is Fareed Zakaria. He's written extensively about those disaffected voters, Fareed, that we just highlighted. Of course, you're also the host of Fareed Zakaria GPS right here on this network. Fareed, what's at work there, especially when you start to put together so many different and complicated movements throughout Europe and the United States?
You pointed to the diversity very well, because one of the things to note is Germany does not really have great economic anxiety. Germany has been doing superbly, not just the economy on the whole, but the manufacturing sector has done well. Inequality has not risen very much in Germany. The common theme that you're seeing fueling the rise of these parties across the Western world is immigration. And it got a big boost in Germany because of Chancellor Merkel's decision to take in 1 million refugees from the Syrian civil war. I think that more than anything else explains the rise of the AfD. And I think Merkel, being the kind of master politician she is, has already begun to adjust and try to, in some way, win back some of those voters by announcing that there was a one-shot deal and beginning to get tougher on immigration herself.
So this is the interesting thing, and I'm interested that you point to that as opposed to pointing to the economics of it, because some people would rather point to the economics of it without pointing to the fact that a lot of the ads that they used against Angela Merkel had her in a headscarf, which many people said zeroed right in on the alienation you're talking about.
Exactly, and Germany is doing well economically, and you see the same phenomena in Sweden, which is doing well economically. Holland, Denmark, and Northern Europe in general has been one of the winners in this last decade. But they have had lots of immigration.
This is going to have an impact on all of us. How does this not only impact Angela Merkel and how she can bring that coalition together, but what she then brings to the table in the EU or on the global stage?
That's the crucial question, because Germany has been this extraordinary anchor for the EU for the last 10 or 15 years, and especially in the last 5 years when there's been turmoil everywhere else. Germany has been the anchor, and Merkel has been that anchor. My worry is that Merkel is going to face what I call the 10-year itch. You know, after 10 years, leaders lose a certain amount of their political will, their ability to function. They start, you know, opposition starts to develop. So if you end up with a crippled Germany, or Germany that is less active, the danger is that you're going to see more tensions in Europe. Not because of any particular policy issue, but it's Germany has been holding it all together. And Europe is actually poised for a bit of a rebound. As you know, European companies are doing well. The European Central Bank has provided liquidity and kind of dealt with a lot of the issues. So Europe is on a glide path where you could imagine it has a good 5 years, as long as you don't have something that makes, you know, that another Greek-like crisis where everybody needs a leader, and Germany is unable to function as that leader.
And I'm interested, Fareed, and you have gone through this whole issue of the disaffected voters. I mean, you had a special here on CNN, Why Trump Won, and you famously didn't see it coming, and you explained why, and yet a lot of those strands are still at work in Europe and here today. Where do you go with that? Where do you appeal to that in order, whether you're Angela Merkel or anybody else, to kind of appeal to those elements in society and bring them back into the fold? Because that's what she's talking about.
It's a great question. I think the key challenge for center parties, center right, center left, is going to be to recognize that this is a problem. Look, you have had a huge amount of immigration in the Western world. The number of foreign-born immigrants in the United States in 1970 was 4.5%. Today, it's 14.5%. It's about the same shift that's taken place in Europe. So you have had a lot more people come in. They do come from places that are more alien in various ways. So I think center, right, and left parties have to recognize that, have to focus on assimilation, have to not view any kind of discussion about immigration as racism. Obviously, you want to be open. Obviously, you want to be generous and welcoming. But that, it's reasonable to talk about limits. It's reasonable to talk about a greater degree of assimilation. If you do that, I think you take the main oxygen out of these far-right and populist parties. The economics is actually not the issue.
Okay, but then if we bring this back to the Oval Office, President Trump has to be a little bit smug about what happened to Angela Merkel today. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Look, Trump has been very clever about figuring out a way to capitalize on the resentment that an older, whiter population feel about a changing country. That involves immigrants, that involves blacks. So if you notice the symbolic issues he plays with, they all have that feeling, including the football issue. Yeah. My question to all these Trump voters would simply be, is this going to bring back any jobs? Is this going to bring back manufacturing? Is this going to change the income inequality? What I'm struck by is Trump is still campaigning. This is all symbolic stuff. What about the, and I think he had actually raised legitimate issues about trade with China, about loss of manufacturing, about apprenticeship programs. Where's all that? I mean, why are we spending our time worrying about who's peacefully protesting in public in America, which I always thought was protected by the First Amendment?
And there you go once again. We talking about Germany, and yet we're coming back to that conversation about football. It's been extraordinary how that has seized everyone, because it really dives into all of those, pulls on all of those threads that so many of us have been speaking about.
But end with a salute to Angela Merkel. I mean, it's very hard to stay on after 10 years in politics. She will end up being the longest-serving German chancellor after Helmut Kohl, the second longest in history. I mean, this is quite a feat for a physicist who came out of East Germany, no political background.
There's a lot to point to there in terms of success. It may not feel that way to Angela Merkel the morning after. Fareed, thanks so much. Really appreciate you being here.
Pleasure.
Now,